Speaking of home ownership, realtors can often be the first line of guidance, if you will, when it comes to that decision making process. And it's been my experience that, I mean, I get it, it's their way of making a living, but they want the process to go as fast as possible with their clients. And I think that pressure is ultimately what can lead to people making the decision to buy a home when maybe they should have seen the writing on the wall that they shouldn't have put an offer in on this place.
Mhm.
How can we bridge that gap and change that line of thinking, especially with what you're doing with the Healthy Home Realtor Initiative?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and I think the answer is that not every the methodology is not going to resonate with everyone. Not everybody's going to want to learn how to advise these types of clients in this way, and I think that's okay. That means that there's more room for other people to specialize and to really niche down and to create an entire very lucrative market. The forecast for wellness real estate is like 900 billion dollars by 2028. That's what the Global Wellness Institute is forecasting for this. And I mean, that's not all people who have been impacted by mold, but there's people who are understanding that their indoor environment is very much impacting their physical well-being. And so those people are going to be looking for realtors who are versed and who are willing to be patient and to support and guide. I always start with I think that if a real estate agent is taking on a client who has these particular concerns and sensitivities, and they are treating them just like every other client, in the cadence that they typically try to close deals. And I also understand that completely. That not only are they putting themselves at risk from a liability perspective, because there could very much be an argument that they're not holding a fiduciary duty for their client. If they're putting the interest of closing the deal above the interest of what the client has said is their goal, then that's a risk. And realtors get sued all the time, you
Hmm.
know. So that's a risk to do that. And God forbid that happens, but we should go in eyes wide open on how we advise clients. And the other thing is advice versus support, I think is a super important distinction. So for example, if a realtor, like lawyers give advice, consultants give advice. They give advice because they're licensed and they're insured to hold the liability in case their advice is wrong or bad, right? If you're a guide and you are offering somebody support, that means I understand your goal. And here are three options for you to get there. And here are the things that you might need to know. And here are some potential resources of what you should dig into more. You're going to have to tell me what you choose out of those three options. That's support. That is the role of a realtor in some of these transactions. Another great example, and you guys might see this, I have seen before, heard of transactions where hot, humid climate, lots of times there's condensation on the air vents, right? And the homeowner will be like, what is that? That looks suspicious. And the realtor may say something like, that's very common, very common. Don't worry about it. Super common.
Hmm.
There is a big distinction between common and normal. Common means a whole bunch of people have done something wrong. That
Hmm.
doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean it's indicative of a normally of a properly functioning HVAC system, right? And by the way, a realtor is not licensed or trained to assess the health or the operation of an HVAC system. So the more proper response would be, you know what? That's something that we should definitely look into. You should have an HVAC person come in and take a look at that. You know, because even if it's common, it's irrelevant if it's common. Is it normal? Is the thing. And are you in the position to give that advice? And the answer from a realtor, unless they're also an HVAC professional, is no. So I think that is just you have to be able to walk in your lane, and you have to do so confidently, but you're not doing so in a way that you're saying that's not my job to answer, that's not my job to answer, that's not my job to answer. You're not helping really facilitate that transaction at that point. But you need to be resourced to help these clients if you intend to help these clients. If not, then you might be taking on a little bit more liability than you chose, and it probably will be offset by whatever commission you get from selling that one or two houses, if you
Hmm.
end up getting sued for a breach of your fiduciary duty.
I liken it to like a car. A car salesman doesn't typically understand how the mechanics of an engine work. But they're just going to sell you that car. They're going to wash it and wax it and make it look good and try to push it off. And I think realtors find themselves in that same situation. Most of them aren't qualified, but don't have the ability to look at that sweating vent and know that it's a symptom. Like you said, it's common, but it's a common symptom.
Yeah, it's a common symptom. Yeah.
That could lead to other things. What I do have an issue with, though, I mean, if take the potential mold exposure from what it could do to you health wise out of the variable here. This is a lot of times a transaction where ultimately factors like, is the foundation sound, is the electrical good, all these dollar figure decisions you'd make when you got a home inspection. It's, they never bring in things like water damage into the factor in regards to what could potentially be an expense, just from that perspective, just from the dollar figure perspective, that could impact my client or the buyer or the seller wanting to buy or sell this property. I feel like if maybe some of the focus was on that, like, here's the ramifications of buying a house where you have water damage and mold growth behind your kitchen cabinets, potential cost involved in having to tear this out and renovating it might be a light bulb,
sure.
especially for somebody who doesn't know that they have sensitivities, but are very sensitive to the potential dollar figures that could be involved in having to correct these issues. So, maybe that could be part of the initial focus, and that you have to be careful and knowing the symptoms to look for, which could ultimately lead to big dollar issues, could also steer people in the right direction to get experts out there so they can determine, hey, what is this? Is there a problem that's going to require a full scale remediation? Is it, to what level, is this issue a problem? And then go from there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think it's really, really important, because part of the certification process as well is just teaching realtors how to spot issues and telling them, like, hey, you should not be the subject matter expert, but here is some visual indications, some sensory indications of potential moisture issues. And if you have a client for whom this is a concern, you being a second set of eyes for them is great, but like you're pointing it out to them, and then they're deciding, what do I do with this information? What do I, how do I assess? How do I quantify? Which is like super difficult to do, because, as you know, it's like peeling an onion. You see a tiny spot under the sink and you see mold, and they're like, oh, that's tiny, that's nothing. Okay, well, you peek a little bit further and it's a large spread issue.
It's always just a little bit of mold, right? In air
just
quotes.
A little. Yeah.
It's under 10 square feet.
Yeah. Great. From what you can see now. Yeah. But that's why I think just exactly to your point, it's so important ideally the client is their own first line of defense.
Right.
We're not quite there yet for a widespread perspective. But professionals in the real estate spaces, if they can spot the issues and help direct the homeowners then to resources to help them kind of figure it out, as opposed to just, glossing over it, which I don't think anybody does intentionally. Again, I just think it's, again, we've got education that needs to be done in this space.
I'm skeptical sometimes.
Most people.
I've dealt with a few, but I think you're right. The majority, I don't think that's the
by
case.
and large. Yeah.
So, there's always going to be, there's always going to be polar, different sides. But I just believe that I think that most people are really good people. And I think that most professionals are really good professionals. I think what we all run into as humans is sort of the conundrum of our need for repetition and being able to kind of silo things and put things in boxes and make things digestible so that we can actually understand them, so that we don't feel like we're constantly running from a bear or a lion or whatever it is. And I think that's where a lot of people run into the belief that mold is not an issue, or that it's only an issue for a very small percentage of people. They're like, oh, it's 25% of the population. It's nobody. It's just highly susceptible people. It's, it's very sensitive people. But if you kind of take a step back and go, like, what do you think mold does? Like, outside, what does it do? It breaks things down. How do you think that your body, your soft tissue, is immune to that? Why do you think that that's okay or acceptable in your largest financial investment, in your indoor environment where your children are breathing? You take 25,000 breaths a day, and we spend 90% of our time indoors. Like, these just small facts don't support the fact that we can ignore mold in our indoor environment, And so just kind of helping people to understand that, but also giving people grace, and that it takes people time to get there. And, I don't know what you guys would be doing if you weren't in this profession. And I certainly wouldn't be sitting here talking about mold, you know,
No.
if I hadn't experienced it. So like, you know, I get it. I get it. And I think there's a lot of people, like, especially when we were going through this at first, it was very lonely because we didn't know anybody who was going through it as well. And we also kind of just felt like, where's all our friends and family? Like, where is everyone? You know, but as I kind of took a step back, I was like, man, I get it. I bet they were just as freaked out as we were, you know, and even more so because they're like, have these people lost their minds? Like, what
Yeah.
are they doing? You know, and not wanting to trust us enough to know that we were doing what we felt was best for our family.